Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break and are ready for this next session, presented by Carlos Azira, Chief Data Scientist at Creative Artists Agency. Carlos will discuss the transformation at his company from disconnected centers of analytics excellence to a centralized data team. Thanks for being with us. Carlos, take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carlos Ariza, Head of Data Science for Creative Artists Agency, and today I'm going to talk about our journey towards enterprise AI. So one thing that we realized when I joined CAA about 3.5 years ago is that the landscape had massively changed in the last several years, and it was just going to get more and more crazy, I guess is the right word. You think about it, streaming has become king even more now after the pandemic. So Netflix is spending $19 billion in content in 2021. Disney Plus, by the time you hear this, will have more than 100 million subscribers. Spotify is averaging 28 million podcast listeners per month. So measuring things just using Nielsen ratings and box office is just not good enough, right? Streaming has become the new currency. Now, also the value of content is evolving. So the way people value their own content and the way people are paid for the content is changing. Intellectual property is more valuable across different platforms. Things that emerge as a book or a novel become valuable movies or podcasts. And then they're still changing how artists are getting paid. They're getting paid upfront, what's called buy in the back end, right? Instead of receiving a long stream of revenue as things go to syndication and they get sold internationally and all that. So that's a major change, and the industry is still trying to adjust to it. And then last but not least, we see a real problem with the lack of clarity in performance metrics. So it's very difficult to know exactly how many people watched. The platforms are not actively sharing that information. There aren't standard measurements. So, and we don't know if just eyeballs and views is more valuable than engagement. So those are all open questions. So in response to this, we basically established a data analytics capability at CAA. And our mission is to accelerate the creation of opportunity for our clients through the use of data analytics. Now, early on, we had major questions, right? Do we build this inside or outside our IT department? How big should this organization be? How centralized? Because obviously we had centers of excellence across the organization. So to answer those questions, we went to the source, and we were lucky to be starting kind of from scratch. There was very little in terms of an actual data analytics infrastructure. So we went to Analytics at Work. And this is, if you're familiar with Tom Davenport, I mean, he's been writing about analytics for more than 15 years. And Analytics at Work is one of his books that gives you kind of a nice template for how to build an organization. And he and his co-authors in this book established this model called the Delta model that allows you to basically analyze where you are in your analytics journey. And we realized that we were straddling between stage 2 and stage 3. Definitely not an analytical competitor yet. Data was very siloed, lots of islands of technology and expertise, but no cohesive effort. And I think the leadership understood that we needed to do this, but they weren't really sure about how to go about it. So that was then, and this is now, right? So what's happened as of last summer, we actually got profiled in Forbes by Tom Davenport as a case example of how to use analytics for competition, which is very rewarding, right? Being able to see that the journey and following the template gets recognized in the press. And we definitely feel the difference. You know, data has become critical, a part of the way things get done in the agency. Never to replace the agent, just to augment their intuition. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the presentation. But that's really where we are right now. We feel like we're moving fast towards that analytical competitive phase, which is where obviously we want to go. So how we're organized, it's interesting, right? So we have decided to specialize a little bit within our team. We're a total of about 20 people spread across 4 different buckets. The data science group, we concentrate on algorithms, data experimentation, data quality. The data analytics team concentrates on visualization and interactive dashboards. You'll see some examples of that later on. And really about data storytelling. It's a very different skill. And then we have a data insights team, who is basically a team of business analysts that are great at using the data and great at translating the data insights into actionable insights that can be used by our agents in negotiation to support our clients' vision and dreams. And of course, at the bottom, we have data engineering really supporting our computing, storage, and production pipelines, right? So they're in charge of making sure the data is timely, up-to-date, organized, and it's an ongoing process, because vendors change, vendors come and go, they upgrade APIs, they change the file formats, and our needs change as well. So we demand a lot of data engineering, as you can imagine. So that's our basic organization. I would say what we like to call our secret sauce is this concept of data unification, right? If you think about data in the old world, people would log into a UI and download a report, and then log into another UI and download a report, and eventually that becomes difficult to maintain. It becomes very difficult to join and traverse from one source to another. So we recognized early on that unification was the secret sauce that would allow us to kind of take a leap in automation, take a leap in productivity for our agents, and so forth. So we're connecting four major areas. We're connecting data about audience demographics. And when we say audience, sometimes it's social audiences, sometimes it's viewership audiences or listening audiences. We also have, obviously, transactional data, internal data about our deals, our financial system, and CRM. We have social affinities, which come out of surveys and panels that connect brands with audiences and interests. And then we have, of course, performance, meaning viewership, listens, engagement of different kinds. And they all come from different vendors. We handle probably at this point more than 20, 25 vendors externally. And then internally, of course, we have different sources. And that number changes all the time. So to give you an example, and again, this being an entertainment conference, you probably are very familiar with this issue, right? But unifying titles is a pain across the whole industry. And many efforts have been tried, either EIDR being one of the most famous ones in terms of trying to integrate across the industry. It's good. It's not fully accomplished as a vision because some vendors don't participate in either. Some of the information is not fully populated or is not accurate. So it becomes an issue when I want to know, okay, is this, in this particular example, the Real Housewives of Atlanta, right? There's so many pieces of content that belong to that intellectual property. Do we unify them all? Do we keep them as separate? Sometimes if you're trying to track social conversation online about the show, all of these blend together. So there will be one show ID for that social conversation. But if you're looking at content and cast and all that, then you're going to have all these different entries, right? And then, of course, this is just at the title level. If you go down to the episode level or even the season level, additional complications. So it's a difficult issue. Lots of tools, but at the end of the day, it's a key part of the value, extracting the value from these tools. So how do we get there? We call it broccoli. We eat a lot of broccoli, and what that means is we do a lot of this unification, and a lot of it is automated. A good percentage of it gets automated with tools like Tamer. We rely on Mechanical Turk for certain things. We do a lot of fuzzy matching using string distance algorithms and all that. But at the end of the day, we sometimes just have to roll up our sleeves and do it manually. And sometimes we assign thousands of unification mismatches to different teams and just say, okay, we're going to spend all Friday morning working on this. So it's kind of the data cleanup being 80% of data science is definitely true, right? I mean, I think this is part of data cleanup, making sure that these matches are correct. And it happens across all the data sets. So it's making sure the right Instagram handle is connected to the right show or the right talent, or it's making sure that if we switch vendors, which we've done a couple times, are the new vendor IDs match our old vendor ID. And over time, you build this asset, which becomes incredibly valuable. And we call it the Rosetta Stone, right? So the Rosetta Stone allows us to traverse across different vendors. And we're not trying to replicate initiatives like ITER. The ITER works at a much deeper level, and they work across the industry, and they fund it differently. So this is only concentrated on the vendors that we use and at the level of detail that we need. And it's basically our version of master data management, effectively. And that's what it is. And it allows us to extract value and connect all these different sources. So what you're going to see now is a few examples of how that unification adds value to our clients. What we did, and this is built in Power BI if you're curious, we use a platform for business intelligence called CAA Intel. So across the agency, And outside our clients and so forth, they know this platform as Intel. And Intel is kind of our brand name for kind of the external shell that surrounds our data team. So at first, one of the first things we did is to understand social reach and social audiences. And this becomes particularly useful for things like commercial endorsements and so forth. So in this case, for Reese Witherspoon, we know how many followers she has across multiple platforms, where the followers are, what are the followers' demographics, affinities, and engagement, and so forth. And then that's useful. But then if you think about, for example, digital demand for shows, then that's a completely different data set, right? So you have to look demand over time. And again, we use different vendors to track demand, but we're able to say, okay, for this particular show, the demand over time peaked at this particular point in time. And we use that for comparisons, or we use that to support negotiations of next seasons, for example. So if the next season, if this season had very high viewership and very high engagement, then the deal for the next season should be higher. And it allows us to be on a better footing and solve some of that information asymmetry that gets created if we don't have that information. Because obviously the platforms know how well the shows are performing. So it's important for our clients to know as well, and for our agents to know as well, so they can balance or level the playing field. Another source, for example, is looking at some of the information that the platforms themselves are releasing. So back in February of last year, Netflix started to publish their top 10. So we've been collecting this information, analyzing it, and then using it. And it's very powerful to be able to say a particular client was on a show that was X number of days as number one on Netflix, and on a particular country or across the world and so forth. So being able to use this information is very powerful for negotiating deals in general. And again, we do this at the company level as well. So one of the things that we do is also understand our buyers. For example, Marvel Studios in this example, you can see how big they are, the performance of their show, of their films, and the performance of the content. In this particular example is just motion picture performance and nominations and award wins. And this gives our agents a confidence when they come into a meeting to have all this information at their fingertips, basically. Last but not least, obviously, our music touring business is also supported by Intel. And what we do with them is basically understand recency. What cities have you played, in this case around Atlanta, over the last 12 months or the last 18 months? And are you missing any of them? And then we're using machine learning to try to help with tour planning and prioritize dates and tours. Obviously, with pandemic, they had to stop touring, so there's been a lot of patient waiting in that department until we can have concerts live again. But the tool, so that's actually giving us time to develop more tools and test them kind of on cold, and hopefully by April or May of this year, we'll be able to start using these tools again. So in terms of machine learning, right? So what I've shown so far are basically examples of descriptive analytics at the end of the day, right? We have data, we unified it, we put it together, and we're able to then pull insights from those data sources very easily, very quickly. But when you think about how to use machine learning, I think one of the things that became clear to us is how important similarity was to our clients. So it happens very often. For example, if a client of ours a brand is querying the agency and saying, we need a new spokesperson for our brand, the person that they choose may not be available. So if they're looking for Reese Witherspoon and she's not available, we can actually use our similarity models to say, well, people like Reese Witherspoon under certain criteria, and they're similar because their audiences are similar. So it's not because they look similar or because they worked on the same thing. It's because their social media audiences have a lot of overlap in terms of what they like, in terms of their demographics, psychographics. So using that information and building what I would say from an algorithm perspective is a relatively simple principal components model, but it allows you to find similarity very quickly and then allows our agents to provide alternatives. So that's on the audience side. When you start looking at casting, for example, or trying to put together directors with a cast or finding a writer for a particular show, it's very interesting to see what they worked on before. So we use traits, and we have every single piece of content over the last, I would say probably about 20 years, we've tagged with traits using one of our vendors. And these traits allow us to prioritize and say how similar two artists are. So in this example, Paul Rudd and Reese Witherspoon actually have a fair amount of overlap. And you can see that they both over-index on Valentine's Day movies, they over-index on date night movies, or movies for shows, obviously, romantic comedies, comedy of manners, farce, success is the best revenge, which is kind of an interesting theme, right? So when we're working with traits, we're looking much deeper than just genre and box office or something like that. We're actually trying to understand, are they believable in this kind of material? And so this has been very helpful to support and get ideas about casting. And one thing that I'm going to keep emphasizing is that the machine is not making any decisions. This is just augmenting the intuition of our agents, not necessarily replacing them. One example I wanted to share, which is kind of relevant to where we are in history, right? Early in 2020, it became clear that something big was happening with the coronavirus, right? The COVID-19 epidemic. And we had a lot of questions, particularly in our touring business, about when can we come back? And that was kind of the question that animated a lot of our analysis for, I would say, between February and June of 2020. So we spent a fair amount of time learning from the epidemiology trends and what was happening. We're not epidemiologists. I'm not claiming to be any of them. Basically replicated some of the analysis that they've done and used that to build simulation models that allow us to basically say, how would this epidemic and how fast a vaccine happens, how fast a vaccine is rolled out, will help us recover. So in this particular example, we created a concept of perceived safety and being able to say how safe do people feel going back to concerts. And as you can see, the way we modeled it, and these are models that were built back in around April of 2020. We had a fairly big dip during the lockdowns, and then there was a little bit of a comeback during the summer. And then at the end of 2020, we were back when we had the highest spikes. But now as the vaccine rolls out happens, there were basically at the time multiple scenarios. If the vaccine comes out in early 2021, we'll see a recovery. But if it comes out a year later, for example, that's what this light blue scenario does, then we may see a similar recovery, but we basically lose a whole year of revenue. So those were interesting questions. Obviously, they impact things like budgeting, they impact things like business planning, staffing, hiring, and of course our clients' income. So very important to be able to have this information as we were planning fiscal year 2022. And it's an ongoing process, of course. But we consider simulation as part of our tool set, and we use it strategically where we need to. So it's not a tool that we necessarily integrate with the rest of Intel yet, but we're planning to do more with this and things like in the future. So what are the key lessons? If you think about the lessons that we learned over the last 3 years, there really are no shortcuts, right? We wouldn't be able to do what we do now if we hadn't spent so much time building foundations like data quality, like data cleanup, integration, and so forth. The second one is using an agile approach and being smart about it in terms of saying, when we're building features for BI dashboard, we're going to use sprints and have a very disciplined approach to release and all that. But when we're doing experimentation in data science, we're going to use a Kanban approach because that allows us to basically keep things on the board as long as it takes without being a slave to an artificial sprint schedule. And a lot of it is focusing on reuse. So models that we build for one thing and code that we build for one thing gets reused on another. That's, again, very modular, very, very agile. It's the word. Definitely involve the business. We do a lot of data testing or alpha testing even with our agents. They get involved from the beginning. Sometimes they help us identify new data sources themselves, and then we integrate it with the rest of the platform. The other thing that I mentioned multiple times is this concept of augmented intuition, and it's our internal joke is that's our version of AI. We don't believe in a computer replacing humans. We believe in helping the agents think faster, better, more productive, having new ideas. So the tool and the data becomes a way for agents to come up with better ideas for our clients. And lastly, we started being basically what we were called a secret weapon for a while because the agents that knew about the work that we were doing were getting better deals. And over the last 3 years, we've become, I'd like to think, a strategic weapon for the agency so that we are used across the board. So in terms of the future, we have a few open questions, obviously, things that we're working on right now. How do we value the work of our clients? What is a fair deal in a multi-platform environment where it's not just about box office or Nielsen ratings, but it's views and engagement on platforms? And then how should payment methods evolve to meet the ways people are consuming entertainment now? And I would argue, kind of to leave you with this final idea, is this concept of auditable predictive analytics. So if we and the buyers, the platforms, the cities, the Netflixes of the world, could agree on a set of predictive analytics that helps you predict the value of the content fairly and with shared data sources and all that, I think it would be easier to reach agreement on value and come up with ways to compensate clients for better performance and so forth. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, and thanks for listening.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful presentation. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, and the first one is, what was the most difficult part about maturing the organization to stage 4/5?
Sure. Well, in that case, I think it was really about trust, building trust with the senior leadership, building trust with the agents, and having them basically allow us to take over some of the vendor relationships they had so that we could manage them and reduce overlap between vendors and all that. So that process of centralization is required to move up in the stages of maturity. It's all about building trust. And that, it took time. It took time and it took some convincing, but I think we're in a much better place now than we were 3.5 years ago when we started.
Great. And the next question is, are CAA agents more comfortable using data now than when you started?
Definitely. I think one of the things we've seen it used to be more of a push process where we would come to them and say, hey, we found this insight or we've seen analytics that can help you. And it would be more of a conversation about how could this be useful to me. But now we're actually had to implement a process to manage requests and prioritize requests. And we have an online board where we track the requests and can prioritize by area and so forth, because it's become more of a pool where agents are coming to us before a meeting saying, hey, I have a negotiation for the next season for a particular client. What data can you give me that's useful? So it's really changed the way the agents work with us, and it's become more of a strategic tool for them.
Right. And it looks like we have time for one more quick question. How do you recruit and retain data scientists for your team?
That's a good one. It's really hard to keep data scientists happy. They have to be constantly intellectually stimulated, right? So we've been doing two things. One is that internally we're organized, I would say, as a lab. So our data science team is a data lab. So their scientists and the team are giving a lot of flexibility to explore new algorithms, to explore new data sources, methodologies, and partner with other consultants in the team. And also we've been partnering with the universities, trying to do presentations in classes, and that allows us to have a pipeline of interns that would eventually become full-time members of the team. So a couple of our data scientists went to our internship program and came from relationships we have at the university. So that's definitely useful and very important.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing all this wonderful information with us. This has been very enlightening. And to all of the group, we've got Sergey with YieldMo coming up next. And meet us over there. You can either access it through the virtual lobby or the pop-up that will jump here in just 1 second. We'll see you there. Thank you.